Well, hello everyone. My name's Justin Gunther. I'm the director here at Fallingwater. And thank you all so much for joining our webinar series today. We host a webinar a season. So sign on to the Fallingwater website at the beginning of next year, and you'll learn about what new webinars we'll be offering in 2025. So our webinar today is the last for this year, and we're joined by Adam Reed Tucker. And Adam is an architectural artist who uses building bricks as his medium and teaching tool. And he does this to increase awareness and appreciation of architecture, engineering, art, science, and design. And Adam graduated from Kansas State University with a degree in architecture and a focus on the philosophy of design. And while practicing as an architect, he discovered an interest in using the building brick as an outlet to explore and explain architecture and engineering principles. His models, including architectural icons, roller coasters, and engineering marvels. If you look kind of behind Adam on his screen there, you can see some of those other models. But they've been displayed in museums, at conventions, and at commission sites worldwide. Adam's passion for the medium led him to working with the Lego Group to develop new initiatives, including co-founding the Lego architecture line and work as a Lego certified professional. Adam then created his own model company called the Adam Brick, with the mission to inspire builders to recreate and learn about the world around them using mini bricks, and he'll talk about his specific brick today. And this is not just meant as a creative toy, but as a three-dimensional modeling tool that he calls the building block of design. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to tell everyone a little bit about kind of how we'll do the run of show for our talk this afternoon. So for those of you that are joining us, Adam's going to kind of talk through his process for how he designs models like the Fallingwater model, then speak a little bit specifically about this one, the model in particular. But as you have questions, as Adam's talking, and as we get into the kind of Q&A section of our webinar today, if you all will use the Q&A chat box that's at the bottom of your webinar screen, I'll be watching the Q&A chat box as we go through today's webinar, and I will do my best to field everyone's questions to Adam. So as you have questions throughout today's webinar presentation, please click on that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, type in your question there, and I'll field your questions directly to Adam, and we'll keep the conversation going that way. So Adam, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and let you tell us a little bit about your process and about the model.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the intro. Hello, everybody. This is a very, very prestigious honor to be talking to all of you. It's not something I do very often. I tend to be a little bit quiet and reserved, so I'm not on social media a whole lot. I do love doing in-person events, which I was lucky enough to do about a year ago, actually on site. And maybe some of you on this webinar actually participated in that rainy night that we all experienced. As Justin had said, my focus is architecture, backgrounds in structural engineering, and I also love the philosophy of design theory. And using the brick as my creative medium or my tool is something that I stumbled on about 15, 16 years ago now. I actually was a trained architect, did a lot of work in the Chicago and Kansas City areas, and I loved every minute of it and the firms I worked for and the relationships and the people I had interacted with. I felt like I was not completely fulfilled, though, in my mission for telling the story of design and art and architecture. When you're working with a client on a project like the Topeka Public Library or the Walgreens estate out of Chicago, as an architect, your relationship with the designs really happen very intimately with the client, and you don't really get to share your visions of architecture and your design process with many people. And so that was one of the things that I did not really enjoy being an architect, was that I didn't get to share that creativity. And so one of the nice things about being an artist is that you get to define your art and you get to create your own art without constraints like budgets and client demands, city building zoning codes, laws of gravity. And as an artist, you get to create a sculpture or painting and hanging it up at a gallery. And many people are lucky enough to have it in a museum as well. But many people get to enjoy and appreciate your art. And so what I wanted to do was, with my background in architecture and my love of architecture, specifically mid-century modern architecture, I wanted to couple that with the benefits of being an artist. And I had to figure out a medium in which to tell my story of art and architecture. So I went through things like metal and wood and paper, ceramics, glass. And while I could tell the story in all those different disciplines, one of the things that I couldn't do was have somebody else be engaging and build their own story of art and architecture. And so I stumbled on the Lego brick in 2005, which at that point, everyone knew it as a toy, a building toy, but no one really knew it as a truly a creative medium. And one of which would tell a story outside of its traditional uses as a toy. Now, fast forward, obviously the Lego group has come a long way, and they've done amazing things with the brick for the adult enthusiasts, as many of you probably are well aware of. One of those case studies back in 2007 was Lego architecture, an idea that was born by me and a former employee named Paul Smith Meyer, who is a brainchild of a small division of Lego called the New Business Group, which brought in these skunk works, if you will, projects to prove the case, whether it's Braille with Lego bricks in Lego education, or in the case of architecture with Lego architecture. And it proved to be successful for many years, and it still is, I believe, till today. But that kind of ran its course with my interest and what I could do with the brick. And so it came to a point where in 2019, I softly resigned, all on great terms with many people and with the company, to pioneer a new way of thinking with the brick. And one of the things that I realized was that I needed a smaller brick. I needed something that would capture more detail, be more of a refined experience, and something, to be completely honest with you, didn't feel like I was repurposing a child's toy. And the stigma, unfortunately, that kind of came along with that in my experiences from time to time. A lot of people were very supportive, but didn't quite understand the connection between what I was doing and using a child's toy. So having a smaller brick, the brick that I use is 3/4 the size. So some of you out there might be familiar with the Lego brick, and that's what we call a standard size brick. And then there's micro bricks, which are sold under the name of nano blocks, and those are very small and very cubistic. But there's an in between, and it's called the mini brick. There's a manufacturer in Asia who makes this brick for me. It's exactly 3/4 the size of a Lego brick, and it enables me to, in the case of Fallingwater, create a model that is not huge and overly expensive, but still large enough that you can capture the detail and the setting, but with a smaller brick, so I can still enable the smaller fine the refinedness of the details that I wanted to get into the model. And so the Atom brick was born in 2020. The name, phonetically, yes, of course, it does match my name. I did not name the company after me. The idea behind the Atom brick is that the atom in life is the building block of life. And so this brick, being the smallest brick that I believe is yet still functional, is the Atom brick of design. And so that was why I named it the Atom brick. And there's actually in the logo, you can kind of see a little, I think it's called a neutron, a little helix around it to drive the point home that this is the nucleus of design, or again, the epicenter of what I believe is the refined scale of building bricks. So jumping in to the model specifically, I want to tell a little bit of a backstory in terms of how the Fallingwater model actually came to be. In 2008 or 2009, when I was with the Lego Group, we had formed a relationship with Fallingwater to recreate their design. And this model, sans the 4 trees, I think there's 1 here and then 3 here. This was essentially what we came out with. And back in 2009, it was pretty provocative in terms of creating a model, a souvenir display model to represent, what I believe is, one of the top, easily recognizable and historic pieces of architecture. So this was what we came out with. This is not, however, the first model I did design of Fallingwater. This is the one that just went to retail or to market. So there it is. It was very underwhelming, I will admit, for me, even though a lot of people received it well, as something that had never been done before. So there was that uniqueness of it. But for me as an artist, it was really selling the design short. And I've always had, going on now, 10, 12 years, I've always had it in my heart that I needed to create what the original intent was. And so for me, it's about capturing the essence of the design. It's a representation, an artistic representation through my eyes as the artist. But at the end of the day, it's very important that there's a fine balance between that and then the authenticity of the landmark that you're creating. There's a fine line between how realistic you can get it, and then it kind of looks a little bit too playful, but then pulling back a little bit on the minimalist side to make it look like it's a watercolor painting or a sculpture. So 10 years ago, when I designed the original Fallingwater that I just showed you, that went to market, this was actually a model that not too many people have seen before. This, believe it or not, was my original design that I had presented to go to market. And so the one very obvious thing you could see is it's not a square base. It's very organic in nature, and I'll speak on that in a second. Also, the trees are a bunch of tan antennas, which, believe it or not, were actually custom made by the Lego Group for this model, because I believe at that time they did not produce that actual part. But for me, the trees being realistic was not really important here, but it was capturing the essence of the verticality of the nature behind the building. The organic shape of this plays into the topography of Fallingwater, and that it also naturally helps to tell the story of the gentle river. And I would say it's more of a stream that falls underneath the house. And so by having that be very organic, it gives the illusion that the model continues off in a very natural way, in a very natural setting. And so one of the unfortunate things about the model that we came to be was that by squaring off the model, which was we'll just leave it as a suggestion that was given, to me, it didn't do the model much service. So re-examining the model 10 years later and taking some of the things away from it that I did like, and some of the things that I didn't like or that I thought could be improved, was on the positive note. Some of you may be familiar with the original model. It actually came apart. So you could actually be engaged with the model and it would come apart. And I'm probably going to have this fall apart in my hands because it's been a while since I've taken this apart. But all the layers, basically the floor plans, if you will, the floor plates, all came apart. So you could actually see the different layers of the building itself. And for me, the problem with architectural models is they're very static, and by nature they're not dynamic like a roller coaster or a train or a car. And so I wanted it to be engaging, and so by having the layers come apart, it became an engaging experience, so you could have interaction with it. And I carried that over to this guy here, which took me roughly a year to design, on and off. It's always good as an artist to step away. Sometimes you can get too tunnel focused and you need to step away and have a fresh set of eyes. And so it took me about a year on and off, went through about, I would say, somewhere between 14 and 20 revisions along the way. I had input from close friends, fellow architects, to get their insights. But ultimately, the way it's shown here is literally 99.9% of the vision that I had in my head. I just needed to figure out how to convey that in a three-dimensional story of design. And so this model here does come apart. And the nice thing about this model, it actually, unlike the predecessor, I was able to put in hints of furniture and the layout, some of the interesting rock work that was exposed around the fireplace and the cooking area. And I will take a stab at taking this apart to show you, for those of you that don't have this model yet, which I encourage you to go ahead and get through the Fallingwater bookshop or gift shop or online as well. And it really will come to life in your fingers. The idea behind building this model, as you, the consumer or the fan of this model, is that I wanted to take you on the journey of what it was like to be a craftsman, an artisan, an architect, the builder, the client. And so by taking your time with this model, which I actually, for the first time, put some interesting notes. This is one of the inner boxes that the parts come in. But I actually, I know this sounds a little crazy, but there's some words of advice that I put on the box, because I said to myself, this model is not inexpensive. And once it's built, you're not going to rebuild it. And so for me, I'm trying to think of being the consumer in that, what are you actually paying for? And this probably goes for anything in life, right? Whether you're eating or you're paying for a nice dinner or you're purchasing a vehicle. I mean, at the end of the day, with this model, what you're actually buying is not a display model, believe it or not. You're paying for the journey, the experience of putting the model together. Because once you've done that, that's gone. So in Chicago, we love our pizza here. So once you go to buy a slice of pizza, you're enjoying the experience of eating it. Once you ate it, that's it. It's gone. So maybe that's a bad analogy, but it applies in this case. And so I took a lot of care and thought in terms of how you build this and how the model evolves in its construction. So starting with the site, which is very important, and building up the layers of the river and the rock work and some little hidden treasures by the waterfall. And then the site itself and the topography. How do you build that? The house, believe it or not, only took me about a month to design. That was pretty straightforward. Once I figured out the scale, the proportions, the building techniques, that was pretty easy. It was the site that was challenging. And what's really interesting about this model is that, you know, if you take away, you know, like on this one here, it's 90% building, and the site really isn't doing anything for the building. And when you go to Fallingwater, the reason why the building on its own as a standalone would be really impressive, and it is really impressive, but it's really the setting that it's nestled in that really makes the building that much more amazing. And so if you were to start taking away the trees as the background, right? And the topography of the angles and you start to take that away, it really starts to actually take away from the architecture. So if I turn this around, the structure and the shapes that I came up with, I don't know if you could see that well, but I had all these layers, almost like lily pads, supported by columns. I needed to figure out a way to not tie up a lot of bricks in the base itself, but I still wanted the base to look elegant and interesting. And so if you can see that, I think you can. A lot of time went into figuring out how to design that and then to make it structurally, stable as well. And then there's a little note on the back that I'll leave to the people that buy the set. But yeah, in terms of the time that it went in and materials, in terms of the colors, in terms of the shapes, it was all a matter of balancing out the texture with the colors, trying to be minimalist with the design. And then also, like I said earlier, my vision of a level of authenticity with the design. So you can see the difference between even this model, which is still a favorite of mine because it's the first one I designed for the Lego group. But you could see this is an artistic vision for how to portray the design. But you can see this one here is so much more refined and more elegant. And where this one is maybe more abstract, you can see the authenticity and the realism that I was able to achieve with this one, but yet still have it be an artistic expression, especially with the base. And then, how much of this do I show, right? Where do I terminate the river versus the topography? I'll take a few of these pieces off now so you could see in the original model we didn't really have the ability of showing the texture of the stonework, which hopefully that remains focused for all of you. And then also, figuring out how do you change color without there being any real indication of how it's connected. So, underneath, figuring out how to lay all that out. And then there's a process called part optimization that I do. And basically that is, this model is made of, I don't even recall right now, but how do I reduce the amount of, because the sets are based on a price per part. And so trying to scale the project as tight and condense the part usage as much as possible to have a lower price point ultimately that you're going to be purchasing, that is a driver of mine as well, because I also want there to be a very high level of a perceived value. These sets, it's very important to me too that you feel like you're getting a very fair value for the product you're purchasing. And that's something new for me as an artist or an architect, or even when I was working for Lego, that really wasn't a concern of mine because I was just the designer. But now being the owner of this company, having really, to be honest with you, my reputation is the only thing that I have at the end of the day. And so making sure that I'm responsible for, the financial portion of it, the packaging, the booklet, the care and the design, all of that is a reflection on me as the business owner. And it's not something I'm generally comfortable with, but it's something that I wanted to be, very respectful of, because I myself, I'm a consumer as well. And so I work very hard for the things I have, and I want to be respectful of people who are purchasing any of the Atom Brick sets to feel the same way in terms of a perceived value. But moving on here, let's see this part here. Okay, so this is interesting. So I had to figure out a way to have this model not fall out when you tilt the model if you're putting it on your shelf or something. So actually, before you take this off, the entire vertical window is almost like a key, if you will. And so there was no way actually to integrate this into every floor plate. And so I'm like, well, we'll just have it be a unique aspect that this pulls out vertically, whereas everything else kind of comes out horizontally. And the next level here, you can see the interior. Let's see if we can get some lighting there. And now I'm introducing stairs and actually rooms and color and material differentiation. And then you could see the bottom, how it has to be in order to integrate, again, the color changes, which are based on the material changes. So the tan would be the stucco or the cement, and then the dark tan is the actual stone. And so there's a color difference and a texture difference, just like there is in the real building. The next level to come out here is, I believe this is the second floor. And here you can see some of the rooms, the bathroom. Again, the stairs, the outside stairs here were very complicated to figure out how to get that almost an Art Deco style railing, and then the stairs embedded within, and then the trellis here, how to have that. That is actually built sideways. In the brick world, there's an acronym which I'm not a big fan of. It's called SNOT, and it's studs not on top. And that was derived from some clever people that play with Lego bricks and design with Lego bricks, that you don't have to just build straight up. You can build sideways through various techniques and parts. And so there is some of that SNOT technique that's used. You can actually see some of the beds in there as well. Again, it's just enough to kind of illustrate where the living quarters are versus where some of the functional quarters are. Now, the next level here is the first floor, and let's see. And I'm afraid that I'm going to break this. I'll just tilt it inward so you can see the first level there, and you can see the fireplace here with the cooking pot, and it actually does turn in and turn out like in the real residence. And that gives you a top view where you could see where the cars would pull in here, or a single car back in this time period. And then it can drive underneath that trellis. There's actually 2 trees on site that actually grow up through the trellis there specifically. And yeah, then you can see the driveway path here, which is not cobblestone, but it's a natural, just almost like river rock stone path that the cars drive on. So there's no asphalt, there's no concrete back there. And if Justin wants to start asking me a few questions, I'm going to play with this and get this out without destroying it.
All right. Adam, that's wonderful introduction to the process and to the model. And we've got some great questions queued up from the audience. And as you all are watching and listening, please do put any questions you have into the Q&A, and I'll field them to Adam so that he can answer. That's really cool how you did the steps that go down to the street.
You know what? That was one of the biggest crimes in my original design, if I will, is that there was just no way in the original design at that. And that is such a highlight. It's these floating planks, if you will. And then there's 2 vertical supports, and trying to get that, which is a very delicate addition to the model, but that was paramount in this. The model was not going to be coming to market if I did not, capture that aspect of it. And then just really quickly here, you can see the foundation and where they actually cut away into the property. And believe it or not, you can actually access, Justin knows this better than I do because he's actually on site, but you can actually walk your way down through the house through a set of stairs that go into the rock itself in the foundation there. And
Yeah, that's great that the little square area is actually where the furnace for the house sits that heats the hot water radiator system, and the larger box is the storage room and basement for the kitchen. That's
yeah, I believe that,
amazing that you were able to sandwich that in between the boulders and everything.
I read somewhere that they actually used it as a long-term refrigerated room because of the temperature in the rock there. But yeah, at any rate, so.
Well, here's a question for you, Adam. First of all, it's a two-part question. And first, the comment is about the packaging boxes and instructions are top notch. So this participant wanted to thank you for that experience, because the packaging, how the whole kit was assembled, and then the kind of experience of taking it out of the box and putting it together was a wonderful experience in and of itself. And then the second part of this person's comments was about other Frank Lloyd Wright structures that you've designed or ones that you might have in the works down the road.
Okay, so thank you for the comment and the observation of that. I think it's really important for the first part. Let's see. The Lego Group is the #1, brick manufacturer in the world. And leaving the Lego Group was going to be a very difficult choice for me, because if I were to work for a competitor, it would be frowned upon internally, because I had such an amazing experience with the Lego Group. And I didn't want to simply be opportunistic and leave the Lego Group to do something else that would be in conflict with what I was doing while I was with Lego. I view myself more humbly as an entrepreneur. And as such, every decision I made, including the packaging, I wanted to differentiate myself from not just Lego, but there's a lot of companies out there. Over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, there's actually been over 120 brick companies. Some of them are still around today, like Mega Blocks, Tyco Blocks, Max Bricks, Kobe, Oxford, Star Diamond. There's many brick companies out there. Some are very good and some are very bad. But ultimately, I wanted to differentiate my brick company from everybody else, because otherwise, what's the point of doing this? And so, again, I also think it's important. I was trying to reach out to a different audience. So yes, they're bricks, and naturally kids are going to be interested, but I wanted to have people who love building models with their hands, mostly adults, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, up to their 60s and 70s. There is a point where my bricks are a little bit too small for somebody to work with. But the point is that the packaging was something I thought long and hard about, and I was inspired by the Apple iPhone box that I originally received as a gift. I think maybe, I don't know, my first iPhone was probably 8 years ago or whatever it was. But that box, I still keep it and I still have it. And it's like, why do I keep a box? Well, it's just too nice to throw out. And so I was inspired by that 2-part box. And then again, the experience of opening it up and taking pride in the set, and kind of going back to a reflection on my reputation. I don't have a factory. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a huge team, a huge company. It's a really, very young company. And so what I needed to do was make sure that whether it was the artwork on the box itself, which you can see here, we spent a lot of time to get that rendering just right, so it really evokes an interest of what you were about to embark on inside of the box itself. And then the boxes, the small boxes that contain within, and then the hardcover book. So again, everything I've done, I've taken cues that are about 180 degrees. So I appreciate you picking up on our packaging and our attention to detail when it comes to even the paper and the instructions. To take it even a step further, one of the things that I didn't like was that I had to figure out when I was building a set, and I'm not going to name any company because they're all printed on gloss, and gloss paper, there's a richness to the color. And unfortunately, though, when you're building, it's a very functional process. It doesn't have to look pretty. And the glare off the light, I would always, if I was building with two hands, then I'd have to put something down. I'd have to flatten the booklet out because I was getting this glare from the gloss. So our pages are actually matte. They're flat. So you get no reflection or no glare. So it's even little things like that that we did to differentiate ourselves. And so the second part of your question is, have I done other Frank Lloyd Wright models? Yeah, we have. We have done the Unity Temple. We've done the Martin House, the Johnson Wax. They don't go by wax anymore. Excuse me. I'm aging myself. But up in Racine, Wisconsin, the Johnson headquarters, which is an amazing company, and they bring a lot of household items to all of us. That building is amazing. You have to visit it at some point. That's one of the favorite models that I've designed. The roofs come apart so you could see the lily pads inside. And then we've also done Taliesin West, which is in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we've done some textile blocks, and other things we've done and we've worked on is a line of chairs, Frank Lloyd Wright furniture, which may or may not come out. I'm actually looking at the models. I don't want to get up and grab them, but I did bring one here that I can share with you that was designed a year and a half ago, and we're figuring out when to come to market with it. And that is the Price Tower. I believe that's in Oklahoma City.
It's in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Oklahoma. Yes. This is Price Tower. And this building, unlike Fallingwater, this building, the tower especially, was an amazing challenge. I almost couldn't figure out how to support it structurally, the interior of the model itself, because the geometries of the tower are so there's a lot of layers to it, and using square bricks again to replicate that unique design was a challenge. So this Fallingwater building took me a month, where this one took me 3 months to design all of it. And again, you could kind of see the geometry there. It's not straightforward at all. And then how it's actually angled off of the square base plate as well. So how do you do that and then join it with a building that is squared up to the base? So in this one, it actually has no site or no topography because it's located on a city square block. But so this one, that one's a neat one. The other ones that I can talk to you about and share that I have designed, and we're in this figuring out again how to come to market and when and all that, is the Ennis House. That design is amazing. It's really, really nice. And then we also have Wing Spread, which is a favorite of mine. And that one is going to be the biggest because of the orientation of the four wings that Wing Spread has. And that one's going to come to market in 2025, probably a year from now in the fall. So those are the two answers to your two questions.
Yeah. Another one of our participants states that she loves the intentionality of the building process, but how long on average does it take? How many pieces is it? And of course, it's going to vary by person, but what do you think, Adam?
I mean, well, first of all, as an artist, the design, any artist will tell you this. You're never actually done with a design. There's always, Maybe that's not true for painting artists. Maybe there is a moment where they're like, and it's done. But with this medium, you can always strive to make it look better or refine something. So I don't limit myself. So for me, I don't. So here's an interesting thing. I'm sensitive to the price point, but not if it comes to the sacrifice of the design. So could this model have been done for $100? Let's just say in 1,000 pieces. It could have, but for me, it wouldn't have done Frank Lloyd Wright. And I know this sounds a little bit philosophical, but I do believe that we're champions of our, the people of our past, and you kind of carry on that torch. And so for me, I feel like it would be underwhelming if I was just focused on $100 model because more people could afford it. And yes, of course, I would love that. But I feel like at this scale, and at this level of detail, I can't take this design any farther. Even adding $100 more, which would be another 1,000 pieces, is it going to add anything? No. But taking 1,000 pieces out, would it start to erode at, so everything I like her recognition that there is intent behind every piece. There really is actually. So great observation. And in terms of the parts, again, whatever it takes. I have a series of bridges coming out in a couple of weeks to tell the history of the bridge for fans of engineering. And so with those bridges, I figured out kind of like what the size should be in the proportion, the scale. But then once I figured that out, because bridges are very long and skinny. And so once I figured out what I thought a good presentation size was for anyone's shelf or table, whatever the part count was in order to convey, whether it was the Sydney Harbor Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge, it was going to be what it ended up being. And so, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So this participant is commenting on the colors, saying they look incredible. How many unique brick colors are represented? Were there any constraints about colorization that you faced? How much time did it take you to select the brick colors? Anything custom?
Great question. All right. So I'm thinking about how to answer this. So so when I was working with Lego, there were some restrictions on colors and the palette, and then also the elements, meaning the shapes. Molds are very expensive to produce, on the average of, say, anywhere between $8,000 and $25,000 to have an actual mold tooled out that actually makes the parts that are injection molded. I won't get into all of that. One of the nice things about being an artist and about the manufacturer that I have now is that, not that I exercise this, but I have the ability to use any color that I come up with. So I'm a big fan or a big champion of the Pantone color system. And I use that extensively in my office. So I am allowed to, or again, not allowed is not the right word. I have the ability of color matching any color I want. There's a cost to that, of course. But if there's a color that I needed for this model, that would be a unique color, I would have that ability. And when I was with Lego, we had to stick with a palette. And again, that palette was pretty nice. I mean, there was, I think at any one time, around 60 different colors. I think in Lego's history, they've had well over, I want to say 140 different colors, and many different reasons why they've had colors come and go over the years. Their elements and shapes library, that we call it, the shapes, we call them a portfolio or a library of elements. Lego has roughly, and I'm only calling out Lego because they're at the pinnacle of this, in this industry. I think they have about 14 or 15,000 different shapes. And that's great. You have to understand that they're a toy company, so they have a lot of shapes for their little minifigures and accessories. They have other lines for younger audiences like Duplo parts. older, advanced, like their Technic series that has motors. So there's a ton of different applications. With what I'm trying to do, it's not about having the biggest palette of parts. It's about having the right parts. So there's about 1,200 different elements that I currently have, and we're only adding about 4 elements, five, six, seven, somewhere in there a year. And again, there's a lot of cost in that. Our average mold costs are around $10,000, and so that's, unfortunately, again, I alluded to it before. As an artist, these are things that are upsetting to me because I have to think about those things. Unfortunately, if I do want a new part, one of the nice things about the relationship I have now is that I can create and mold a new part. I did a series of sets for the Snap-on company. We did a corporate exclusive line for them. They're not available for retail. I'm sure on aftermarket you can locate one, where we actually did custom wheels for one of their vintage cars. And it was paramount that we do that. We didn't have any spoked rimmed wheels from the 1920s in our lineup. And so we had made the decision to go ahead, and in that case, it made financial sense to go ahead and purchase the tooling for that mold, which was so unique to that model. So in Fallingwater, getting back to that one specifically with the color choices, fortunately, again, making something too authentic and too realistic, I have the ability of creating all these colors and yes, all the shapes, but it can be a detriment that being constrained to a certain amount of colors and shapes. It's like any end of the spectrum is not good. You want to be a centralist and then have the ability of moving this way. But if I had, an unlimited palette of colors, then I'd still be designing this for another year. And so I feel like having a minimalist approach, carefully selecting colors that are close enough to what I'm trying to represent here, whether it's trees, having, old growth and new growth trees based on dark brown and normal brown. They call it reddish brown. But at any rate, at least having some differentiation in the foliage as well, where it's not taken too far. But again, it's just enough to showcase that there's some depth and dimension using the colors in an appropriate sense. And then also with the shapes as well. Fortunately, I was able to utilize within the 1,200 elements, the parts that were needed to replicate Fallingwater. And obviously a lot of that has to do with the very straightforward, if you will, in terms of the geometry being a lot of 90 degrees. Okay. If I were to celebrate the works of another architect, let's say Frank Gehry, there's a good reason why I don't have a Frank Gehry model. And that's because working with bricks, they would all have to be custom shaped, and that would be a whole other thing. But one other thing I do want to mention about color is that, especially with the water, there's ways of layering the colors as well. So you can actually create hybrid colors. And so I think that's really mostly indicative of the water itself, where I have blue tones underneath the clear or the frosted nature of the falling water. So this looks like it's frosted, or can you see that? I'm sorry. Where you could actually almost sense motion in the water because it looks clouded. And then where the stream is still, you get that glass surface, but yet you see some of the blue color, and that it, especially in this part of the world, is not really polluted water. It's crystal clear, and you get that sense of that subtleness of the blue. Those are the things, again, that I'm trying to capture. And then the last thing I will note about the color is that throughout the groundscape of the actual nature, there's lots of different plant life, lots of different ground cover. But for me, what I wanted to do was, just do spots of color with these pastel yellow leaves. And again, just to indicate that there's flowers there, and that it also helps to soften the masculinity of the architecture, and that it gives it some warmth as well. So there you go.
That's great. So you mentioned it's quite a process putting this together. It's a very rewarding one once you finally get the fully assembled piece. And you mentioned that most people probably wouldn't take it apart. But can you take it apart? Is it difficult to disassemble and then maybe go through the process again if you wanted to?
Okay, so when let's just make very clear when we're saying taking it apart, obviously I showed you can take apart the model in its layers so you can examine and appreciate the different levels, and it gives you a little bit of an engaging experience. So it's not just this passive static model. The parts being smaller, the tolerances of, and I'm going to get a little technical here, and I don't want to get long-winded with this at all, but the tolerances for what we call the clutch power, which means the elements sticking together with friction internally. The smaller you get, those tolerances actually are exponential. And so one of the worst things to do is have bricks that don't stick together. And believe it or not, I have some bad molds that have parts that don't even have, they just fall apart. The opposite of that is parts that are too tight and you cannot pull them apart. There are some areas where some of these parts are a little on the tight side, and that's just because of the nature of the molding process and the fact that the tooling for this actually has to go to almost medical grade tolerances, believe it or not. Yes, I know that sounds ridiculous. We're talking about, glorified toy being used for, telling the story of art and architecture, but some of these elements are small and the margin for error, I mean, we're literally talking about 1/100th of a millimeter, literally, in order for the clutch to just be just right. And so if that's off even 10% at that scale, some of these parts are just, you can get them apart and you can obviously put them together. We put them together here. But I would say that taking apart this entire set piece by piece, you could do it, but I don't think it would be an enjoyable process. I actually just last week took apart all of my test models for a bunch of other sets. I'm doing a series of steam engines. We're telling the history of trains. Those will come out probably next spring, next summer. We're doing 19th century steam engines from the late 1800s. And I have a series of about a dozen prototypes. And I just had to take them apart to rebuild because I didn't have some of the parts. And taking apart all of these, I tried to get my children to do it as part of their chores, and they wouldn't even go for it. So it's not an enjoyable process to take apart these, but you certainly can, and you're welcome to. But at any rate, yeah.
Very cool. When you're working to do a piece of architecture or a piece of engineering, do you just use the blueprints, the drawings, or do you use 3D scans of the buildings and the landscapes around them? How do you start?
When I first started with Lego, I didn't use any computers at all. I have an extensive library of probably, I'm looking at half of it, and I'm not trying to be braggadocious. I love books. I probably have a collection of 600 or 700 architectural books that I reference. I'm very old school. So I'm in my 50s, just so everyone knows. So I don't really rely on technology. I'm kind of like, Bruce Willis in Die Hard in terms of technology and liking it. It's a great tool, but it sometimes it can be a damper on your creativity. At any rate, when I was with Lego, I did everything by hand. I didn't use any computers at all for any design work. And so very much like when I was in college or even a practicing architect, computers were just coming on. So three-dimensional renderings and building in digital world was not really something. We had AutoCAD, but that was two-dimensional, nothing like 3D Studio Max or other programs that do 3D. So it was really hands-on. So even with this original Fallingwater model, I have the original 20 physical models that I built to get to that point. And I would never there's a back button meaning I could take apart the old models to create the new one. And I didn't do that because I wanted to see the evolution of how I was advancing the design. So I always kept the early models. That being said, when it comes to my research, a lot of my research comes from doing Google Earth, believe it or not, because books have great photos, but they don't show you the depth and the relationships of the topography sometimes. So you kind of have to like look around. Maybe or maybe not, we'll be thinking about doing a guest house at some point for this Fallingwater model as an extension. For those of you that are familiar with this property, the guest house is kind of a second thought, unfortunately, with a lot of the books and literature out there. And it's the guest house, so it's not the primary focus. But for me, in my world, if I'm going to recreate that as a model, it needs to be the primary focus, right? So a lot of Google Earth is used for me to see like the back retaining wall of where the guest house is kind of carved out of the side there. And you can't, there's no books that actually show that. Even blueprints, sometimes back then in the early 1900s, the blueprints and the site mapping that they did back then was not always perfect. And so a lot of the time when they were building on site, they were making decisions on site. They were using the blueprints as a guide. Now I'm talking about how the building was set into the environment. They may have had to carve out a different section, or they had a bit of different rock that they had to get around, which back then they didn't have the technology or the scanning to know what kind of material they were, digging into. And so to answer that question, Justin, today I do all of my design work digitally, all of it. I'm not a fan of that because I still like to work with my hands, but the efficiency of designing in the computer for this model, I can't even imagine if I were to have done this by hand and rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, because there's some pieces underneath that if I had to take out, it would take me hours to access them. But in the computer, I can hide and freeze, and I can easily move digital parts. The other thing I can do is I can color the parts instantly. If there's a part that I need 600 of, there's no end to the digital parts that I just clone a part. It's done. Physical parts in my studio, I probably have about 3 million parts in about 80 different colors, but that's not enough. Like for instance, I didn't have this particular flower over here in the pale yellow. And so if we do like in studio photography, I would have to have the correct color part, and having that flower be in brown or pink or purple or something, but in the computer, I can change it quickly. So.
Well, thank you, Adam. We're out of time, and I just wanted to say, it was fascinating to work with you through this process of kind of watching you create this model. And I just have to say how much we think it's so successful and really captures the level of, we've said, the intentionality of the design, the sophistication of it, the beauty of it. It really is a work of sculpture in and of itself once you put it together. So thank you for taking the time to create it, and for being with us today to talk about it, and really encourage everyone to buy it and put it together. It's a really wonderful project to do. And you can find it on our Fallingwater website if you just go to fallingwater.org. And then in the top bar navigation, just click on shop and you'll discover it in our online store. You can also go to the Adam Brick's website and find it there too.
And there is a little card inside the box for some tips and tricks.
Good.
There is a few advanced, very subtle but very finicky parts of the model, namely the circular staircase and how that integrates into the land. And it was challenging in the instructions to show that, and I think we did a fairly good job. But sometimes seeing it virtually happen, and one of the things actually, so that's what this card is for. And one of the interesting things that Justin, I just want to just really quickly say is that we're looking at actually creating our booklets in maybe it might take a couple of years, but we're thinking of actually having our booklets be a LCD display that is renewable, reusable, that has our instructions along with the printed instructions. And there it will give me the ability of having short videos of some of my thought processes and tips and tricks along the way. So the instruction booklet becomes more interactive and
Really
engaging.
interactive. Wow. Oh,
But
very
that's
cool.
something that won't be on your laptop. That would actually be part of the booklet.
Amazing.
So that way, if you're retreating to your cabin or you're on somewhere inaccessible to one
You
of
don't
the
have Wi-Fi.
you don't have Wi-Fi, you have everything at your fingertips. So it's
That's
just
really
something
cool.
that we're looking at doing to advance the evolution of the experience again. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you would like to watch the recording or share this with friends, we'll be posting the recording of today's webinar on our website too. So just check back to the webinar section of the Fallingwater website and you'll find the recording there to share out with people. But Adam, it's always fun to kind of watch what you're creating and really neat to learn about the trains and bridges. So all of you that are fans of putting models together, Adam's always creating something new. So keep an eye on him and watch what he's doing.
And Justin, thank you and the property for having the faith in me
Yeah.
to
Well, look at,
recreate
yeah.
the property with two different bricks. So that's a unique position to be in, and it's one that I take very sincerely. And again, I appreciate you again having the faith in me and that I would come through with something that would represent your property and one that again, I think one of the nice things is that if someone is overseas or someone doesn't have the means to come and visit the property and they have all the Fallingwater books, this is a way of bringing Fallingwater to you. And I think that's pretty neat too. So
too. That's wonderful.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for participating today. And Adam, again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.